What is up, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to show you my top 5 core compression exercises to improve your visit, press to handstand, Staddler Press, Pike stretch, pancake stretch, and even fundamental positions such as the L-sit. Without further ado, let's get to it. Alright guys, core compression. Core compression is one of those overlooked aspects, especially in the calisthenics community, and one of those aspects that if you want to get certain skills, they stay in a different category than planche, front lever, and those type of skills. For that one, you can take top 5 core exercises for calisthenics skills. I'm going to put it up right here. But core compression is our ability to basically get our chest and our abdomen as close to our thighs and our entire thighs. So basically our ability to get right here. Now, if I'm using my hands, there would be a passive stretch. So I am passively getting into that position. The same if you do, for example, a seated forward fold. What active core compression means is your ability to not only, let's actually go to the ground, not only fall completely, your ability to even lift your legs actively and compress, basically, the lower portion to the upper portion or vice versa. The muscles that are involved in this action will be mostly your hip flexors. You have the iliopsoas, which basically crosses the entire hip joint. It attaches to your vertebra and it attaches to the femur as well. It's one of those muscles that crosses the most amount of joints. And what it does is basically hip flexion among many other postural and other actions of the muscles, but what it does is hip flexion. Another muscle that creates hip flexion is going to be your rectus femoris, which is one of the 4 muscles from your entire quadriceps, 4 muscles. The rectus femoris is the only quad muscle that actually attaches to the hip joint, and it attaches right below, somewhere in the tibia. What that muscle allows is also hip flexion, but since it is also a quadricep muscle that attaches from here all the way to the knee, it also creates knee extension. The other 3 quadricep muscles only do knee extension. So what I'm going with all these fancy terms, which you don't need to remember, it is that the muscles responsible for hip flexion are mostly your iliopsoas complex as well as the rectus femoris. Now, how do we kind of isolate, and why is this important to know? It is because some people, once they try, for example, an L-sit, they can get their leg straight, but the leg is slightly bent, because you can raise up to here, and that's purely iliopsoas complex doing the motion. And once you extend the knee, then your rectus femoris, this huge muscle right here, also plays a huge role. So if you are one person that into an L-sit, you are kind of like this, or even if you're into V-sit and your legs get up to here, couple things can happen. The first one and the biggest recommendation for this video is get very loose hamstrings. Stretch your hamstrings as much as possible. I want to make an anecdotal story about that, is that my compression, these are my top 5, that if I had to choose only 5, this would be it. However, I got my compression being very serious with my yoga practice. We do a lot of forward foldings, we do a lot of ballistic stretching, we do a lot of active mobility and active flexibility and different positions that I cannot include in this video. So if you guys want a full routine where we literally going to stretch our hamstrings like crazy and we're gonna work on those hip flexors and core compression like crazy, leave it in the comment section down below and we'll do a follow along. But these are 5 exercises that even though I got my compression with those, these literally supercharge my compression, and these are what allow me to get my L-sit to the point that I have it, my V-sit, my press to handstand, my Staddler press, and all those compression positions. With that being said, we also, besides the lower portion coming up, we also need the upper portion coming down, or depending on where you are doing the position, and that is mostly by your rectus abdominis. So your ability to actively flex your spine, and my spine is in flexion, but I'm contracting my abs in order to get to this position. That, combined with the hip flexors, both the iliopsoas and the rectus femoris, is what gives that compression strength. Keeping that in mind, we're going to begin with the first exercise, which is going to be, of course, the L-sit. Let's demonstrate that on the deep bar. You can check our full L-sit tutorial. I don't want to get into too much detail about the L-sit, but we'll get into some regressions, progressions, and the application of the L-sit when it comes to compression strength. The L-sit, the easiest place that you can do it is on a deep bar, just because you have that range of motion to lift your legs, and you can get up to here, you can get up to here, you can play around with it. If you do it on the parallels, you have a little bit less space, and if you do it on the floor, you have even less space, so you need to push even more. So the L-sit is this position right here. I want you to not send your hips back. This could be because you are super flexible but not that strong. I want you to push the hip forwards and create a 90-degree angle. The L-sit is a lot on the triceps, posterior delt, but let's focus on the core and the hip flexors. The L-sit, most people say that it's a core exercise, which it is a core exercise, and I also categorize the hip flexors within our entire core, but people think that it's your six-pack because it's actually pretty tense, but they work mostly as a stabilizer. What brings your legs up is going to be your rectus femoris and it's going to be your iliopsoas. So if you're someone that when you do an L-sit, you get up to here, that might be either or, but if you can bend your legs slightly and you get up to here, that means that your iliopsoas might be strong enough to get your legs up, but it's your rectus femoris that is preventing you from extending the leg, or hamstring flexibility. That's what I want you guys to work, both on hamstring flexibility, ideally on the resting times that you do all these exercises that we're going to list, while you work on the strength of your hip flexors, both the iliopsoas and the rectus femoris, as well as your core. Now, for the L-sit, we literally, as you push your hip forward, we enter into a slight posterior pelvic tilt, kind of neutral, to involve a little bit more on the lower core. So it's not only hip flexor, we also want to activate the lower core. We're going to be doing exercises that preferentiate this area instead of the hip flexors, as well as doing some exercises to emphasize the hip flexors. So that is the L-sit. If you don't have the L-sit, we're going to go into the regressions for this particular movement. And even if you have the L-sit, the regressions are going to help you because it's going to be dynamic movements towards the L-sit, and then we go into the progressions or the more advanced variations. So if you don't have an L-sit, best recommendation, two things. First, work with tuck L-sit on a 90-degree angle to really get that isometric strength, and then work on lifting your legs up and down as slow and as controlled as possible, trying to push your hip forward. So right here and down. Here, small flex from the lumbar spine and down. Then another one will be knee raises up to here and down, keeping those hips forward, up and down. That form that I show right there, that is mostly hip flexor dominant because we're not flexing that much from our lower spine. If you want to emphasize more the lower core, because maybe you realize that you have a strong hip flexors, you can have your leg right here, but you're struggling really to use your core, this part of your core, your rectus abdominis, then I would encourage you to, not momentum, but once you get here, flex a little bit and then down, flex and down. And to really, really emphasize the lower fibers of your core, then I will go into knee raises, because you can take the rectus femoris out of the equation. You can really focus on flexing from the spine, up and down, up. You can go all the way down and all the way down, up, to really focus on the lower fibers of your abdominals. Those are the variations and the regressions that I would use to get towards my L-sit. Once you have the L-sit, you have a couple options. You can either challenge yourself and do it on parallels. You have left space to lift your legs, which is gonna challenge you more to really get that compression. Or you can do it on blocks. You can start right here. This one is really hard to balance. Then you can move it on up to here, actually, right here, right here, right here. You have 3 settings to begin lowering, or any elevation that allows you to do the L-sit. Once you get more advanced, you can begin getting the L-sit on the floor. Last recommendation is as progressions for this exercise. You're gonna put either ankle weights. I remember on the time that I really got my compression, I was putting ankle weights for all the exercises that we're gonna list. So just keep that in mind. I'm not gonna be repeating every time. Ankle weights for all the exercises is going to be your progression to make it harder. L-sit on the floor with ankle weights, 15-second hold with a 60-second rest. 4 sets is a core killer. Whoever does that, I believe they already got an L-sit, or they're missing a component that we're gonna be seeing on the other exercises. L-sit, we cannot overlook the importance of this exercise. That's why it's here, that's why it is in the previous video, and that's why it's an incredible exercise that every calisthenics athlete should do if they intend to get into calisthenics skills. With that said, see you in the next one. All right, guys, for this second exercise, we got another one from our latest video. For good reason, it has to be here, and that is toes to bar. The reason I put this second after the L-sit is because I wouldn't attempt to do this exercise if I first do not have an L-sit at least on the deep bar, because the L-sit, if you see the L-sit, it is a 90-degree angle, and a toes to bar, it is closing that angle completely. So if you don't have an L-sit, you're gonna be compensating a lot with the lats. Let me usually show the exercise and then the most common compensation. So toes to bar, you go here, try to keep your shoulders are as open as possible, close and down. Compensation number one, closed shoulders or not enough hamstring flexibility or open closed shoulders. It is arching and getting up to here. Second compensation is your shoulders might be open, but lack of hamstring flexibility is gonna get up to here. Your legs are gonna start to bend and you're gonna get up to here. Or not even getting the thighs towards your chest. Again, that can be either a hip flexor weakness or a tight hamstrings. On the previous video, I told you guys that it's okay to get into this compensation for the simple reason that we were talking about compression strength, but also working towards the front lever. So if you got some lat activation, it won't harm you at all. Now for this video, we're gonna be working on a strict form. So first, get very good with the L-sit on the parlets. Once you have that L-sit nailed down, you can hang in here or even practice this L-sit with a hanging L-sit. These two variations should be first than the toes to bar, just because here I'm on a 90-degree angle and we are looking to close that gap. In order to close that gap, it requires a lot of core strength, rectus abdominal strength, as well as hip flexors. So variations, the first one will be hanging L-sit, getting very comfortable with that position. Regressions, aside from the L-sit, would be from the bottom down, getting as high as you possibly can. That might mean 90 degrees. That might mean 120 degrees or something like that, and getting as high as possible without bending your legs. So one exercise, one drill for you will be simply getting as high as you can without closing through the shoulders, really opening through the shoulders. This is also an amazing exercise if you have closed shoulders. This is gonna open the shoulders at the same time that you're working on your compression strength. And if you see that movement carefully, it's basically a straight arm press to handstand upside down. So it's really gonna help you towards the press to handstand. Now, you can work with straight legs and really increase your range of motion, but I'm gonna give you other options. The first ones are simply the leg raises and the knee raises that we did right here. Actually, those are the only two that I'm gonna give you. But since we are hanging and we have a little bit more space to go up, we can see that we can get our toes to touch our bar, the bar. That simply means that we can even get a little bit higher. So I would use the deep bar to work on my hip flexor strength, minimizing any movement from the lower abdominals, and I would use leg raises and knee raises here, flexing a little bit more from the lower core to get more of that lower ab activation. So if I show that, if you can get this angle from the side or somewhere from the side, if we're doing leg raises, you get here, but you got all these additional range of motion that you can use flexing our spine. So basically you enter into neutral spine, into somewhat of a posteral pelvic tilt. Now, what I prefer in here rather than that, if you wanna prioritize your lower abs, is knee raises, because you have all this range of motion to go all the way up and all the way down. So really, once you're here, posteral tilt, engage your glutes, then go up and then down, not swinging, not arching, very strict, very controlled, up and down. So combining leg raises, very slow and controlled for our hip flexors, with knee raises, very slow and controlled for our lower abs, both deep bar and toes on the hanging bar is not only going to improve your L-sit, but you're gonna be able to eventually get into the toes to bar, and it's gonna improve all your compression base skills. 4 progressions toward this exercise. Once you can do, I would say that you can at least get to 8, I was gonna say 5, but no, 8 to 10 clean reps with no momentum, with no swinging, with full toes to bar. Then we're gonna be doing 2 variations. The first one, One more time, ankle weights. So only use ankle weights once you can master at least 10 of those reps. There is no need in order to go higher. You can get 2 to 3 reps with ankle weights, but it's better to get 10 without them, unless you're using 1 or 2 kilograms, and maybe you can work on a lower rep range, but at least 5 or 6 on each single set. If not, stick to the leg raises, stick to the knee raises, stick to the L-sit until you advance towards the toes to bar. The advanced variation is using a Staddler bar. Now, it's an advanced variation, but it's also something that not all of us has access to it. So if you don't have a Staddler bar, maybe just go to the next exercise on the timestamps below. But here, the benefit is that first, you're getting an additional shoulder open component because you're forced to be in fully open shoulders. And also, you cannot cheat from your lats. You might cheat from your legs, but there is no way that I can bend. And this is a movable Staddler bar, but if this was right here, you would not be able to cheat at all. So you are forced to use your hip flexors and your core. This is a great angle to actually see the difference when I use my hip flexors and when I transfer to the lower abdomens. So here, hip flexor, hip flexor, hip flexor, then you begin to posteriorly tilt, you begin to engage the rectus abdominals, and then you go all the way up. As you see, my spine begins to flex, my hips begin to come up, but you want to actually keep the hips as close to the bar or as close to the space that you have if you are using a regular bar, as close to it as possible while you're raising your legs, because you want to get as much compression as possible here without too much of the roundiness. But simply do your best. There is no need to overthink this type of exercise. Simply get very good with leg raises, knee raises, toes to bar. You can even bend your legs slightly. Meanwhile, as long as you're working on your hamstring flexibility and your active mobility while you're slightly bending your knees, there's nothing wrong about that. But I wouldn't try to go toes to bar with my knees bent. I would actually really work on knee raises as high as I can go, and I will go in leg raises aiming for that toes to bar as high as I can go, keeping that leg straight, because I see many people that get super strong even on their V-sit, but they still cannot get this leg straight. So they are becoming super strong in their core, but their body might be imbalanced and they're not building that strength on the psoas major and the iliacus. With that being said, I'll see you on the next one. Right, family, we move on to the third exercise, which is halfway, because as the previous video, we got a bonus one, so make sure to stick to the end of the video. We got 6 exercises, plus all the variations, you know how many they are. The third exercise is a very underrated exercise. It's a very humbling exercise, and it's one exercise that super hard. That's why I say it's humbling, and it's one of the best exercises that you can do for core compression, and that is going to be the seated leg lifts, also known as seated pike compressions. But I'm going to refer as seated pike compression just because I like that name better for some reason. Let's get into the exercise. Let's demonstrate that first. Let me show the exercise first. So what I'm talking about is this exercise right here. It looks super simple. It looks easy as F. It is not, and for most people this is a huge struggle, so we're going to be going through a lot of regressions and then through a lot of progressions. Now, this exercise is harder, and I put it on third instead of at the beginning because it is way harder than an actual L-sit, and I wouldn't say that toes to bar, but a hanging L-sit or just an L-sit. This exercise is harder for one simple reason. The reason is that an L-sit is this position right here. Imagine I'm removing my hands. We are in a 90-degree position, which is you can call it a 90 degree of compression. When we do, or when we lift our legs, even if it's 1 single inch, we are closing that gap. So it's not longer 90 degree, it should be around 80 or even getting into a more compression state. That's the reason why it is on the third exercise. This exercise will help your L-sit, but I would encourage you to get the L-sit first so you get a hang of how it is that your hip flexors work as well in accordance to your rectus abdominals. This exercise, I don't put it on the SM Academy workout programs, for example, until phase number 2. And on phase number 1, they have the L-sit, and it's actually a requirement to get the L-sit. What I'm trying to say is that this exercise, some people say that it's super easy and they put it even in beginners workout programs, but this is not the case. I've seen it not on myself because I got the compression very early on, but on my peeps, on my colleagues, on all the clients, online clients, on the entire community, that they really struggle with this exercise. So let's go through some progressions, some regressions, but just keep in mind that it's very hard and that you want to be working this as you work towards the L-sit. Do not get frustrated with this exercise. This will help the L-sit. The L-sit will help this, but get the L-sit first. So seated pike compressions, let's go through the form first. Some people like to stand against a wall for the simple reason that we can cheat ourselves rocking back. I could encourage you that if you don't have the proprioceptive awareness and if you really want to be strict to yourself, but if you just feel your seat bones, where the two little bony parts that you have beneath how much skin you have on your butt, depending if you feel your seat bones and you feel like these are your seat bones, if you feel like you're doing this and you're getting into that posterior pelvic tilt way too much, you're rocking way too back, that means that you might be compensating too much. But as I'm gonna see on the regressions, there is no so bad to actually lean back. But the idea of this exercise, the final form of this exercise is the more forward your hands are, the harder it's going to be, the more closer they're going to be. So the final form of this exercise, harder variation would be hands right here, palms down, up 1 inch of the floor, up 1 inch of the floor, and you can also work on holds. So you can do 10 reps and hold at the top, or you can, in another day, just work on isometric holds. The easier variation, but still a final version of this exercise to begin with, is with your hands right here. Or even you can begin on your fingertips, try to leave your chest as much as possible. You kind of get into that anterior pelvic tilt, but as your legs raises and you use that lower abdominal, you might get into a neutral to posterior pelvic tilt. But try, if you want to fall forward, you really want to create that anterior pelvic tilt to really stretch into the hamstrings. So play around with either fingertips right here, any progression that when you film yourself, you're getting at least this movement, doesn't have to be too high, and you are not rocking back like crazy. If you're rocking back like crazy and your hands are right here and you cannot even lift, or if you sit up 90 degrees, you place your hands right here and they don't lift at all, that may mean that you have either super weak hip flexors or lower core, or your hamstrings are super tight. This is another exercise where I do 1 set and I go right away into a seated forward fold and I repeat for 3 to 4 sets, depending on what you're doing. So if you are sitting right here and you're really struggling to get your legs up, the variation that I want to present to you is going to be a true fold. What we want to do in this case is increase that angle. So instead of 90-degree angle, we go a little bit behind. So there are 2 ways that we can do that. It's either leaning behind, which it's easier to cheat, and the second one is, if you don't know if you can see that over there, we'll be elevating ourselves to replicate this angle. Let me actually demonstrate that. So you would be leaning back, you keep a slight anterior pelvic tilt to really lift your chest up, but a small flexion right here to really keep that core engaged. And I place your hands either right here or behind, whenever you feel comfortable, and you're gonna begin with only 1 leg, as high as you can, keeping your chest up, not rounding back, but finding that leaning. If you can be right here, it's even better, but if that's too much and you cannot lift it, send your hip, your torso back and work right here up and down. Your leg is completely straight. If you get here, then it starts to bend, only raise up to here to work with that quad activation. 1 leg, then on the other side, make sure you balance yourself out. Really keeping it straight. It's not that you're sitting and only doing that, because if you can do this, you can definitely do this. So it's about increasing the range. Once you can do 1 leg at a time, maybe you can place with 2 legs, which for that one you have to lean a little bit more backwards, just because gravity also plays its role. It's not only biomechanics, but we also have physics. Back to the exercise. Now the variation, we're gonna do exactly the same, but we're gonna be using an elevation. What I have right here is just a table with a block to elevate it and make it a little bit inclined. You can use any surface, and if you go to like parks and stuff, you can find some bench like this. The wall is optional, as long as this is stable. I need the wall, if not this will fall back. But as long as this is stable, but the wall might present a benefit when it comes to being straight and without cheating the exercise. So what I'm doing right here, if you see my angle, is basically a little bit more than 90 degrees, which basically decrease the range of motion that I have to go. This exercise is so hard because we're working on basically an end range of compression strength. It's not going from standing to here, it's going from here to even more compressed, basically like going from L-sit to a toes to bar. That's why it is so hard. That's why I want you guys to be patient with it. So sit up tall and simply either have your hands right here or Ideally, you have something to adjust, or you can just be right here and work on one leg up. One leg up. You can do 10 on one side plus 8 hold. You can do the other side plus 8 hold. And simply, you are basically increasing the range of motion. As you get more advanced, then you can begin right here. You lean back a little bit, one leg, then both legs, and eventually get into the position that at the beginning, the first time that you do this exercise, if you begin right there, it's going to be this. That's okay. That range of motion is more than enough. You might see that it's a very small range of motion, but again, we are already on 90 degrees. So you can imagine that it is 90 degrees plus 100 degrees, so you're working on that end range of motion. For making this exercise harder, is simply leaning as much forward as you possibly can, really working on full end range of motion and using ankle weights. Again, rest in a forward fold position to facilitate the movement, and be very, very patient with this exercise. I'm gonna give you one more, just why not? You're gonna do this on a straddle. Do this only on a straddle first if you're working on your pancake, Staddler press, or a straddle press, and also do it only if you can sit up right and if you have gone through that exercise. But working, especially stretching, working both on open legs and closed legs, both are going to transfer to each other, because hamstrings, we got like different type of hamstrings. Some are more medial, more internal, some are more lateral. So this one will appreciate more these hamstrings right here. We're gonna open up entirely, and that's why when you're stretching, you can move around. That's for a stretching video. If you want a full routine with a stretching incorporated in them and a follow along, down below. For this one, hands forward, same concept apply, point your toes up and down, trying to rock back as little as possible, leaning forward, and you should feel the burn right here. You're gonna get a cramp. That is absolutely normal. You probably heard that before. I'm gonna repeat it again. If you get a cramp, that's totally normal. Shake it up, man up if you're a man, woman up if you're a woman. Just give it a little shake, and eventually it'll go away. It's gonna come back once you increase the intensity of the exercise, and that's what we want. So you do want a cramp, you do not want a crazy pain, but you're gonna get some cramp in order to build a strength, especially in the rectus femoris, in that specific case of the cramp. With that being said, I'll see you on the next one. Right, family, moving on to the fourth exercise. Is going to be a bit more intense. So I really encourage you to get very good, at least with the first two, the L-sit and all the leg raises variations, then seated pike compressions, and this one, especially if you're working towards the V-sit. This is the exercise that I used the most in the past, that I still use, and that is, I believe, to be one of the greatest exercises for the V-sit. What I'm talking about is V-swings, or tuck V-swings. Might have another name, but that's the name that I give you. So let me show that exercise first. So we're gonna do a regular knee raise or leg raise. For beginners or for intermediate practitioners, you can go into the tuck knee. Both has its benefits, and then a straight legs. Let me show those two variations. The first one, it is tuck knee raises. See, yes, I'm swinging. Yes, I'm doing momentum. Yes, that's the purpose of the exercise. Go up, you get as high as you can go. So to get the knees to touch your forehead, and you lean back. The other variation would be legs straight, down, up, down. Really driving those hips forward as much as you can. So the only variations and regressions for this exercise that I would give you would be to simply work on a very slower, smaller range of motion, both with your knees tucked and with your legs straight. Basically, you're getting higher than what your body is able to hold. That's why it's an amazing exercise, because yes, I'm using some momentum, but the height that I get on both the tuck V-sit and the straight leg V-sit, it is way, way higher than what I can control. So we are getting that small isometric contraction once we get to the top. At the same time, we're getting especially that eccentric contraction. So yes, we're using the momentum to go up, but I really want you to control the negative as you're coming down. This exercise will basically open new possibilities of what your body can do. Maybe you think that you don't have the flexibility to go from to go from an L sit into a V sit. But if you try that exercise, you might see that you're able to raise those legs up. Combining that with that eccentric contraction is gonna make you a super beast on the L sit and on the V sit. I would highly encourage you that if you are into V sit training, incorporate this at least 3 times per week at the end of your workouts. You're gonna either do it on tuck one day and then do it on straight the other day. It's a different feeling. When you do it on tuck, you really are prioritizing that spinal flexion as you get into the exercise. And when you're doing with your legs straight, you're also flexing from the spine to go up, but it's more so the driving of the knees forward, and it's harder actually to control because of gravity and because your legs are straight. So give it a shot, both of them. Be very careful. You can absolutely smash not your face, but the back of your head. You can really lean back. As you are leaning back, I'm gonna do final demonstration. As you're leaning back and your hips are coming forward, do not lean back way too much because you are going to fall. It is a counterbalance of your hips coming up. Then as your hips begin to get even higher, then you can lean back because you will counterbalance the weight. But if your hips are right here and you lean back way too much, and you're gonna fall in your face, the same way that if you lift it too much and you lean back too much, you're still gonna fall in your face. So your arms, try to work with them, keep them completely straight, and the only thing that is moving is your hips. And I say that because the more you lean back, the more dangers you have of actually falling back. But nothing wrong with your arms moving a little bit behind. You might see some L sits that your arms are straight, V sits, and your legs are right here. And you might see some V sits that your arms are like here and your legs are still right here. It's a different type of strength. You're using different muscles. When you lean back, you're using more your triceps and your posterior delt. When you're really getting that hips up, keeping your arms straight, it's more about compression, core compression strength, which is what we're talking about on this video. So for the other variations and this plain tutorial might work, let me know in the comment section if you want that. So as you see, my arms lean back, but not as much. The more I lean back, the more I do that, the more dangers I get. So lean forward and back at the same time to get as high as you can go. Fast do not mean on control. Fast and explosive do not mean doing it just because you want to get the reps out. It means going fast, really driving without those type 2 muscle fibers, the fast 2 muscle fibers, and then really controlling that negative as you're coming down. Amazing exercise, especially for the V-sit, but for overall core compression strength and core compression in general. I'll see you on the next one. All right, family, for the 5th exercise, we're coming into a new category, which is going to be mobility. So all the exercises that we did, they target mobility because as you are strengthening your hip flexors and as you are strengthening your core, you are both stretching your hamstrings and stretching your rectus spinae to get into that spinal flexion. But now we're really going to focus on mobility. I recommend that you add this exercise to the end of your training 3 times per week if you are really serious about presses to handstands and anything compression related. What I'm talking about is good mornings. It could be standing good mornings, seated good mornings for more progressions, and then we're gonna get into pancake and more advanced variations. So for a complete beginner that could be tight in your hamstrings, I recommend you start wide first. The exercise, demonstrate the exercise. You go forward, and then you come down. As you can see, I'm only going to the depth that I can keep my back flat. If this begins to happen, then I stop the range of motion and then I go back. And you drive with your hips, no lumbar extension. Just like in the previous video, you create hip extension, you arch, and then neutral pelvis, and you engage those glutes. This is an active mobility exercise for the hamstrings specifically to really get our torso as close to our thighs as possible. We recommend to begin with your hands behind. The biggest cue that I want to give you is anteriorly tilt your pelvis as much as you possibly can. Really keep extending through the entire spine as much as you can, and keep that anterior pelvic tilt that is going to lengthen the hamstrings. Go as far as you can go, and then build yourself back up. You have a couple modifications on this one and progressions how to make it harder. You can either get to the floor or elevate it and do it without weight, or you can do it standing without weight. Let me actually do a standing with weight before we get into the seated variations. So standing, you grab a plate, or be compassionate with yourself, a 10-pound dumbbell, 50-pound dumbbell, something light, or even a plate that is 10 pounds. A plate is just more comfortable than a dumbbell. You put it behind your back. Only do this if you have at least of 90 degrees when you're coming down with your back flat, and you can do 10 reps comfortably without pain in your hamstrings. You go here, same movement, and then all the way up, you drive with your hips and your glutes to create a hip extension. That is with weights. Now let's move on into the floor. If you cannot get into 90 degrees without weight, then only work to the range of motion that you can manage, then bring yourself back up. Eventually you're gonna be able to get into that 90 degree if you combine this with the other exercises and with hamstring stretches. Once you can do 90 degree with a couple reps, and once you can put some 25 plate and go for like 10 reps, you can go to the floor. And I would only do it on the floor if first you can sit up upright, and second if you can lean forward and then pull back with your back flat, at least closing about 20 degrees of leaning forward, of hip flexion, without arching the lumbar spine. If you cannot keep this, you either keep doing the standing, keep working on your hamstring flexibility, or you elevate like we just did on the previous exercise with the tablet right here. So your hips will be somewhere right here, and that's gonna give you more range of motion to do the exercise. Don't do it with your hands like I just showed you, simply elevate your feet, but it's very hard to actually find a surface that allows you to do that. So standing, going even beyond 90 degrees with your back flat will pay dividends, and you're gonna be able to do it on the floor. Once you are able to sit up on the floor, one thing that I wanna mention both in the seated and on standing is what we're trying to target the most is our hamstrings. If I go super wide into abduction, you're gonna feel it right here. You might be able to even fall a little bit forward depending on where the flexibility limitations you have. But as a rule of thumb, for targeting the hamstrings, keep a 90-degree angle, whether you are standing or whether you're sitting down, and you're really gonna feel it on the hamstrings, more on the middle side, like I talked about, but you're gonna feel it on the hamstrings, not so much on the abductors. You anteriorly tilt your pelvis, you externally rotate your legs, not too much. We're not going towards the middle split, just a pancake, but maybe a neutral, depending. Some people go into internal, they need to do external. Some people way to external, they need to go into internal. So just keep your legs completely straight. You can either be pointed or you can be flexed. Both are gonna activate your legs in a good manner. Keep a small activation on your quads, hands behind, then go forward, keeping your back flat. That's as far as I can go, and then forward. Back, shift the hips back anteriorly tilt as you go back, and then up. A tempo for this, a good tempo would be 3, 2, 1, 0. Meaning that you come down for 3, 2, 1, 1, 2, and then 1 second coming up, 0 pause. Basically 3 seconds coming down, 2 seconds of hold at the bottom, and then 1 second coming up. The most important part is that holding at the bottom and that long eccentric contraction. Once you master that, you can grab a plate. You can grab a plate. Put it behind your back, be safe, only do it if you know what you're doing, if you have training a lot and your mobility is good, you don't have pain in your hamstrings, lumbar spine, and you are a healthy athlete that can handle this. No need to rush to this exercise. Go forward and back. You can also do some holds, putting it right here, creating length through the spine, holding it. You can also do some PNF, holding it for 5 seconds as much as you can. You tense everything up, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and then you can relax. And obviously your spine is going to round at that moment, but that's totally okay. When we are stretching our hamstrings, we do wanna get into that anterior pelvic tilt, and we do wanna fall as flat as we possibly can, but eventually our lumbar spine, it is going to round. As long as we keep that anterior pelvic tilt action, sending our hips back, and we just create length through the spine without rounding back, you are gonna get the best out of this exercise. So begin standing, moving out to an elevated surface, bring it out down to the floor, then up some weights and do either pulses, either PNF, or either some holds on that position. I'll see you on the bonus one. All right, family, for the 6th exercise, we have another controversial one, just like the previous video. That's why I'm putting it at the end. Just be careful with this exercise. Some of you might see it and might say, you're crazy, you are fucking up yourself, your spine is gonna go to I don't know where. Some of you that actually understand the exercise or have done it yourself or have done some research about this exercise, it is absolutely safe to do if you do it right and if you progressively overload the exercise correctly. So 2 things: 1, keep good form, and 3 things. First, warm up. Second, keep good form. And third, do not rush to increasing weight in this exercise, because we're going to be increasing weight. And whatever I just said about this exercise, it applies to every single exercise ever if you want to minimize injuries. Your body's a machine. It can adapt to absolutely anything, without the absolutely, to many things that sometimes knee passing my toes. That's not a bad thing either. But what I'm talking about here is the Jefferson curl. So let me actually demonstrate that without weight, and then we're gonna be talking about a little bit of the exercise and how you can progress towards this exercise. So you're gonna begin on a box or something tall that you can reach down. It doesn't have to be that tall, depending on your flexibility and what you're grabbing. And it's a different type of folding than the forward fold that we do right here with our anterior pelvic tilt. In this case, we actually keep a posterior pelvic tilt and we focus mostly on spinal flexion rather than the flexibility of the hamstrings. Of course, you're gonna stretch your hamstrings once you get into that maximal hip flexion, but the emphasis of this exercise is rounding our spine. When we round, we activate the opposite muscle, which is our core. So keep your rectus abdominals. I don't want to keep calling the core because all the core muscles that we have, your front side of the core, keep it engaged throughout the entire range of motion, 1 vertebra at a time, beginning from the cervical, ending up into your lumbar spine. So begin right here, you round from the cervical spine, which is one of the ones that has the most amount of mobility, all the way, and you begin getting into the thoracic spine. You activate your core slightly, and you get mid-thoracic, lower thoracic, then you get into lumbar, and you get into the bottom position. Once you get into the bottom position, you can begin extending, doing a slight anterior pelvic tilt, couple hold, 1, 2 to 3 second hold right here, and then you reverse the motion. You begin from your pelvis, posteriorly tilt, you begin raising up, engage your core to go up, go into lumbar extension, thoracic extension, upper thoracic extension, shin lifting last. That is the exercise. It is to actively mobilize your spine to create a spinal flexion while contracting your core, so you protect especially your lumbar spine and your cervical spine are the 2 more dangerous positions because they are not protected by your rib cage. So really build it slow. It's a segmented movement, meaning that you go from 1 vertebra at a time. If at any point you feel like you're dropping way too fast or you are not controlling or you don't know in which part of your spine you are, then stop the movement and just work on a smaller range of motion until you feel the movement. This is not only an active mobility exercise, an amazing active mobility exercise, but it's also an exercise that is going to build awareness in your entire body. Just for example, like spinal wave, which we mentioned on top 10 exercises for doing it every day. I'm gonna link it up right here. But this exercise, if you wanna make it harder, I'm grabbing a 20 pounds. I build it up to this point. I can go a little bit heavier, but sometimes it's not necessary to go heavier. You wanna shoot for 6 to 10 reps. 20 pounds might be a lot, and I really recommend to start with no weight for a lot of weeks until you feel no pain, until you are seeing the progress in other movements such as the LCD press to handstand, and then eventually add a little bit of weight. And let me actually do it with the weight while talking so you get the idea one more time. So we begin with a light weight. You begin standing tall, cervical spine, upper thoracic, mid-thoracic. Try to not send the hips back that much, but keep them there. Focus the movement on the spine. As you lower down, slide that weight down. Then once you get to the bottom, are allowed to get into an anterior pelvic tilt to get a little more on the hamstrings. You can do little pulses there if it's safe for you and if you are controlling. I'm not just relaxing right here, like banging, like nothing. I'm literally, as I go down, I push with my hamstrings up, down, push with my hamstring and my core to really be active in the position. So not completely relaxed, but stay some active by pressing with the heels. Once you get to the bottom, you begin one more time. Lumbar, core engage, upper thoracic, or mid-thoracic, upper thoracic, shin lifting last. So that is the exercise. It's a pretty controversial one. Let me know down below, what do you think of Jefferson curls in general? Do you think it's wrong? Do you think it's not? There are a lot of debates about this exercise, but the most amount of research is that it is a safe exercise, and if you build it slowly and if you do the exercise right, then you're gonna be able to do this exercise. So there you have it, guys. These are my top 5 or 10 or 20 core exercises to improve your core compression and to really get into those V-sit, those L-sits, those press to handstands, even mana if you wanna get there. We do include these exercises on most of our calisthenic phases because we see the value on them. There are some strong people that can planche, that can front lever, and they cannot even touch their toes. We also have some amazing flexible yogis that can touch their toes. They're super flexible in their hamstrings, but they do not have that active hip compression strength, which is required for everyday movement and most importantly for advanced movement. We take that into consideration, and we actually give you this exercise on our programs, but as always, we give you the not variations or regressions, but we give you the modifications. If you have any pain doing this exercise, there is no point. If you have herniated disc, if you have a spinal stenosis or anything on your spine that causes you pain and that you're not able to do this exercise, or any back bend or any something that involves your spine, there is no point of you doing it. That's why some workout programs, they put you just do this exercise, and most people fucked up themselves because most people that get into those workout programs are there to learn and to see what works for them, not to follow a standard workout program and either to not get results or get injured along the way. We take those details into consideration in all our workout programs. You can check all the information down in the description. With that being said, if you really enjoyed this video, make sure to give a thumbs up to support the channel. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. Make sure to hit that bell button so you get notified every time we upload a new video. And that's it. With that being said, I will see you all next week. Much love. Alright, family, for the 6th exercises to improve your V-sit, power shot.